Have you ever wondered why some people seem to effortlessly see connections that others miss completely? Why certain individuals can predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy while most of us are left scratching our heads? Here's the thing that might blow your mind: intelligence isn't what you think it is. Society has this weird obsession with traditional markers of being smart, like memorizing facts or solving math problems quickly. But what if I told you that the most powerful form of intelligence is so rare that only 2% of the population actually possesses it? Today we read diving deep into the cognitive superpowers of two of the rarest personality types on the planet, INTPs and INFJs. These aren't just letters thrown together randomly. These represent thinking patterns so unique, so fundamentally different from how most brains operate, that people who have them often don't even realize they're walking around with what essentially amounts to mental superpowers. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you're one of these types, you've probably spent your entire life feeling like you don't quite fit in. You might have been told you're overthinking, too sensitive, or that you live in your own world. What if I told you that those exact traits that make you feel different are actually indicators of an incredibly rare form of cognitive processing that most people simply cannot access? Let's start with something that sounds almost like science fiction but is completely real. Both INTPs and INFJs possess what cognitive researchers call the intuitive thinking loop, though it manifests differently in each type. This is where things get absolutely fascinating. For INFJs, this shows up as an almost supernatural ability to see patterns that haven't fully emerged yet. It's like having a crystal ball, except instead of magic, it's your brain processing thousands of tiny details and weaving them into a coherent picture of what's coming. You know that friend who always seems to know exactly what's going to happen in relationships, at work, or in social situations? Chances are they're an INFJ tapping into this pattern recognition system. But here's the kicker: most INFJs don't even realize they're doing this. They'll make a prediction that seems to come out of nowhere, and when it comes true, they'll shrug it off as lucky guess. Meanwhile, everyone around them is standing there with their jaws on the floor wondering how they possibly could have seen that coming. The INFJ brain is constantly running this background process, collecting seemingly unrelated information and finding the hidden connections. It's like having a supercomputer quietly humming away in your head, except you're so used to it that you think everyone's brain works this way. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Now, INTPs have their own version of this superpower, but it's focused in a completely different direction. While INFJs are pattern matching for future outcomes and human behavior, INTPs are building and analyzing complex systems. They can look at any process, structure, or idea and instantly start seeing the flaws, the inefficiencies, and the potential improvements. Think about the INTP as the person who can walk into any organization and within a week have identified exactly why things aren't working and how to fix them. They're not trying to show off or prove how smart they are. Their brain literally cannot help but analyze and optimize everything it encounters. It's like having a built-in system debugger that never turns off. The crazy part is that both of these abilities are so automatic for these personality types that they often don't recognize them as special talents. An INTP will present a solution to a complex problem and genuinely not understand why everyone else is amazed. To them, the solution was obvious once you looked at the system properly. They assume everyone can see what they see. But let's dig deeper into what makes these cognitive patterns so incredibly rare and powerful. We need to talk about something that researchers call cognitive depth versus cognitive breadth. Most people's minds are designed for breadth. They can handle a wide variety of surface-level information pretty effectively. It's evolutionary advantage that served our ancestors well when they needed to keep track of many different threats and opportunities in their environment. INTPs and INFJs, however, are wired for cognitive depth. Their brains naturally want to drill down into the core principles and underlying structures of whatever they're re-examining. This is why they often seem to know things they've never formally studied, why they can make connections across completely different fields, and why their insights often seem to come from some mysterious source. This brings us to the second major trait that sets these types apart: their relationship with emotional processing. Now, before you roll your eyes and think we're about to get all touchy-feely, stick with me because this is where the science gets really interesting. INFJs have what researchers call emotional pattern recognition. They're not just feeling emotions more intensely than other people, though that's often part of it. They're actually processing emotional information as data and using it to build more complete models of reality. When an INFJ walks into a room and immediately senses tension, they're not being psychic. Their brain is processing dozens of micro-expressions, voice tones, body language cues, and energy patterns that most people completely miss. But here's where it gets complicated for INFJs. Because they're taking in all this emotional information, they need sophisticated filtering systems to avoid getting completely overwhelmed. Many INFJs develop what looks like emotional walls or barriers, but it's actually more like emotional traffic control. They have to manage the flow of emotional data to prevent system overload. This is why INFJs often seem to disappear or withdraw when things get too intense. They're not being antisocial or dramatic. Their emotional processing system is literally hitting capacity limits and needs time to sort through all the incoming information. Most people do and understand this because they're not processing emotional data at anywhere near this level of complexity. INTPs, on the other hand, have developed what might seem like the opposite approach, but it's actually serving a very similar function. INTPs tend to maintain emotional detachment not because they don't care, but because emotional noise interferes with their analytical processing. It's like trying to solve a complex mathematical equation while someone is playing loud music in your ear. This emotional detachment isn't coldness or lack of empathy. It's a cognitive strategy that allows INTPs to maintain the mental clarity they need for their deep analytical work. When an INTP seems to ignore emotional considerations in favor of logical ones, they're not being heartless. They're operating from a recognition that emotional reasoning and analytical reasoning use different neural pathways. And trying to do both simultaneously often leads to suboptimal results in both areas. The fascinating thing is that both approaches, the INFJ's emotional integration and the INTP's emotional compartmentalization, are sophisticated strategies for managing cognitive complexity. Most people's brains simply aren't wired to handle this level of mental processing, so they've never needed to develop these kinds of advanced coping mechanisms. Now, let's talk about why these cognitive superpowers come with such a high social cost. This is what I call the rarity paradox. And it explains why INTPs and INFJs often struggle to fit in despite having these incredible mental abilities. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. These thinking patterns are incredibly powerful for solving complex problems and understanding deep truths about reality. But they're also metabolically expensive. The brain burns enormous amounts of energy running these sophisticated cognitive processes. From a survival standpoint, it only makes sense to have a small percentage of the population wired this way. But this creates a fundamental mismatch in social settings. INTPs and INFJs are often operating at a completely different cognitive level than the people around them. They're seeing patterns, connections, and implications that others miss entirely. They're processing information through filters that most people don't even know exist. This leads to a phenomenon that researchers call cognitive loneliness. It's not just feeling socially isolated. It's the specific type of isolation that comes from having thoughts and insights that you literally cannot share because other people lack the cognitive framework to understand them. Imagine being the only person in a group who can see in color while everyone else sees in black and white. How do you explain the concept of red to someone who has never experienced color? This is why INTPs and INFJs often feel like they're speaking a different language, even when they're using the same words as everyone else. They're reloading those words with layers of meaning and implication that simply don't register for most other personality types. But here's where the story gets really interesting. While this cognitive rarity creates social challenges, it also creates enormous intellectual advantages. INTPs and INFJs often excel in fields that require deep thinking, pattern recognition, and the ability to see beyond surface appearances. INFJs frequently become influential leaders, not because they're trying to be leaders, but because their pattern recognition abilities allow them to see where things are heading and position themselves and their organizations accordingly. They are often the ones pushing for changes that seem unnecessary at the time but prove to be crucial later. Picture this. You walk into a room full of people, and while everyone else is having surface-level conversations, there are two individuals sitting quietly in the corner, their minds operating on a completely different frequency. They're not antisocial or rude. They're just wired differently. They see patterns where others see chaos. They feel emotions where others feel nothing. They think in systems and possibilities while most people think in immediate reactions and simple cause and effect. These are the INTPs and INFJs. The architects and the advocates. Two personality types that together make up less than 4% of the population, but here's what's fascinating. When it comes to pure cognitive ability, these two types consistently demonstrate thinking patterns that are so rare, so sophisticated, that they often feel like aliens in their own world. Today, I want to explore something that most people never talk about: the hidden intellectual superpowers that INTPs and INFJs possess that make them fundamentally different from 98% of humanity. And if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you might be one of them. See, we live in a world that celebrates quick thinking, fast responses, and immediate solutions. But what if I told you that the most powerful form of intelligence isn't about thinking fast? What if it's about thinking deep? What if it's about seeing connections that others can't see and understanding systems that others can't comprehend? The first superpower that sets INTPs and INFJs apart from the crowd is something I call the pattern recognition matrix. But this isn't your typical pattern recognition. This is pattern recognition on a level that most people can't even imagine. For the INFJ, this manifests through their dominant function, introverted intuition, or NI. Picture your brain as a massive underground cave system with tunnels connecting information from completely different areas of your life. While most people think in linear pathways, the INFJ brain creates these incredible webs of connection. They'll be talking to you about your relationship problems, and suddenly they'll mention something about geopolitics, and you'll think they've gone off track. But they haven't. They've seen a pattern between how you handle conflict in your personal life and how nations handle conflict on a global scale. This is why INFJs are often accused of being psychic or having supernatural abilities. They're not psychic. They're just operating with a pattern recognition system that's so sophisticated it appears magical to people who do and understand how it works. An INFJ might tell you that your new romantic partner is going to break your heart in exactly 6 months, and you'll laugh it off. Then 6 months later, when it happens exactly as they predicted, you'll be convinced they have some kind of otherworldly power. But here's what's really happening. The INFJ has seen this exact pattern play out hundreds of times before in movies, books, conversations, their own experiences, and the experiences of people they know. Their brain has cataloged all of these patterns and created this massive database of human behavior. When they meet your new partner, their pattern recognition system immediately starts matching behaviors, words, and subtle cues against this database. They're not seeing the future. They're seeing the most probable outcome based on pattern analysis that would make a supercomputer jealous. For the INTP, this same pattern recognition ability manifests differently but just as powerfully. The INTP uses introverted thinking, or T, combined with extroverted intuition to create what I call systematic pattern analysis. While the INFJ sees patterns in human behavior and emotions, the INTP sees patterns in systems, logic, and abstract concepts. An INTP will look at a complex problem that has stumped experts for years and immediately see the flaw in the system. They don't necessarily have more information than the experts. They just process that information through a different cognitive framework. They break everything down into its component parts, analyze how each part interacts with every other part, and then reconstruct the system in their mind to see where the breakdown is occurring. This is why INTPs often appear lazy or unmotivated to people who don't understand them. They're not lazy. They're just not willing to waste energy on problems that they can already see have fundamental flaws in their approach. Why spend 40 hours working on a project when you can see that the entire project is based on a faulty premise? Why participate in a system when you can clearly see that the system itself is broken? The INTP will spend weeks or even months thinking through a problem, considering every possible angle, every potential consequence, every logical pathway. And then, when they finally speak up, they'll present a solution that's so elegant, so simple, so obviously correct that everyone will wonder why they didn't think of it themselves. But here's where it gets really interesting. The second superpower that both INTPs and INFJs possess is their relationship with emotional processing, but they handle this superpower in completely opposite ways. For the INFJ, emotions aren't just feelings. They're information. The INFJ has developed what I call emotional pattern recognition. They don't just feel their own emotions. They feel the emotions of everyone around them, and their brain processes this emotional information just like any other kind of data. But here's what most people don't understand about the INFJ emotional processing system. It's not that they're just more sensitive than other people. It's that they've developed incredibly sophisticated emotional filters. Think of it like this. Most people experience emotions like someone standing in a rainstorm with no umbrella. They get soaked, they get overwhelmed, and they react impulsively. The INFJ has learned to carry not just one umbrella, but an entire collection of emotional umbrellas. They have filters for their own emotions, filters for other people's emotions, filters for emotional memories from the past, and filters for emotional projections into the future. They can be sitting in a room full of angry people and remain completely calm, not because they don't feel the anger, but because they've developed the cognitive ability to process that anger without being consumed by it. This is why INFJs often appear mysterious or detached even though they're actually feeling everything more intensely than anyone else in the room. They've learned to create emotional distance not as a defense mechanism, but as a processing tool. They need that distance to analyze the emotional information they're receiving and determine the best way to respond. The INTP approaches emotions from the completely opposite direction, and this creates a different but equally powerful superpower. The INTP has learned to compartmentalize emotions in a way that allows them to think with pure logic even in highly emotional situations. This doesn't mean the INTP doesn't have emotions. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about INTPs. They have deep, complex emotions. But they've learned to separate their emotional experience from their thinking process. They can be heartbroken and still solve complex logical problems. They can be furious and still see the situation objectively. This emotional compartmentalization gives the INTP an incredible advantage in situations where emotions typically cloud judgment. While everyone else is reacting emotionally to a crisis, the INTP is calmly analyzing the situation and developing solutions. They're the person you want in charge during an emergency because they can set aside their fear and focus entirely on what needs to be done. But here's where both of these superpowers create a significant challenge for both INTPs and INFJs. These cognitive abilities that make them intellectually superior in many situations also make them socially isolated. This brings us to what I call the rarity index. The rarity index refers to the social cost of cognitive complexity. The more sophisticated your thinking patterns become, the fewer people can understand or relate to how your mind works. INTPs and INFJs don't struggle socially because they lack social skills. They struggle socially because their cognitive processes are so different from the majority of people that it creates a communication barrier. Think about it this way. If you're operating with pattern recognition that allows you to see 15 steps ahead while most people are only thinking one step ahead, how do you have a conversation about what you're seeing? If you try to explain your thought process, you sound crazy or pretentious. If you don't explain your thought process, you sound mysterious or aloof. The INFJ will sit in a meeting and see exactly how the proposed plan is going to fail, but they know that if they speak up with their concerns, they'll be labeled as negative or resistant to change. So they stay quiet, and then 6 months later, when the plan fails exactly as they predicted, they get frustrated that no one listens to them. The INTP will see the logical flaws in a popular idea that everyone is excited about, but they know that if they point out those flaws, they'll be seen as a party pooper or someone who's just trying to show off their intelligence. So they withdraw and let people learn from their mistakes. This creates what I call the intelligence isolation paradox. The smarter you get, the lonelier you become. Not because smart people are antisocial, but because advanced cognitive abilities create communication barriers with people who don't share those abilities. But here's what's fascinating about INTPs and INFJs. Despite their social challenges, they often thrive intellectually in ways that other personality types can't match. They become the innovators, the visionaries, the problem solvers, and the deep thinkers who push human knowledge forward. The INFJ becomes the person who understands human nature so deeply that they can predict social trends, anticipate political movements, and see the long-term consequences of cultural changes. They become therapists who can see right through their clients' defenses, writers who can tap into universal human experiences, and leaders who can inspire people toward visions of the future. The INTP becomes the person who can solve technical problems that have stumped entire teams of experts, who can design systems that work more efficiently than anyone thought possible, and who can see logical connections that lead to breakthrough discoveries. But both types pay a price for these abilities. The INFJ pays the price of emotional exhaustion. Constantly processing emotional information from multiple sources while maintaining their own emotional equilibrium is incredibly draining. They need more alone time than other types, not because they don't like people, but because they need time to process all the emotional data they've absorbed. The INTP pays the price of analysis paralysis. When you can see all the potential problems with any course of action, it becomes difficult to take action at all. The INTP can get stuck in endless loops of analysis, always finding one more variable to consider, one more potential outcome to evaluate. But despite these challenges, both types possess something that's incredibly rare and valuable. They have the ability to think independently. In a world where most people think in groups, follow trends, and accept conventional wisdom without question, INTPs and INFJs have developed the cognitive independence to form their own opinions based on their own analysis. This intellectual independence is perhaps their greatest superpower. While others are influenced by social pressure, popular opinion, and groupthink, INTPs and INFJs can step back from the crowd and see situations objectively. They can question assumptions that everyone else takes for granted. They can see solutions that others miss because they're not constrained by conventional thinking. The INFJ can look at a social problem and see past the surface symptoms to the underlying causes. They can understand why certain approaches haven't worked and envision new approaches that address the root issues rather than just treating the symptoms. The INTP can look at a technical or logical problem and see past the accepted solutions to discover entirely new approaches. They can question the fundamental assumptions that everyone else is building on and find more elegant and efficient solutions. This is why both types often end up in careers where independent thinking is valued. INFJs become counselors, writers, researchers, and consultants. INTPs become scientists, engineers, programmers, and analysts. They gravitate toward roles where they can use their cognitive superpowers without having to constantly explain or justify their thinking process. But perhaps the most important thing to understand about these cognitive superpowers is that they come with responsibility. When you can see further ahead than most people, when you can process information more deeply than most people, when you can understand systems and patterns that most people can't see, you have a responsibility to use those abilities constructively. The world needs people who can think differently. The world needs people who can see problems before they become crises, who can design solutions that others can't envision, who can understand human nature deeply enough to bridge divides and resolve conflicts. But the world also needs these people to find ways to communicate their insights in ways that others can understand and accept. The greatest tragedy would be for INTPs and INFJs to keep their insights to themselves because they can't figure out how to share them effectively. This is why I think it is so important for INTPs and INFJs to recognize their cognitive abilities as superpowers rather than burdens. Yes, these abilities can make social interaction more challenging. Yes, they can lead to isolation and misunderstanding. But they also provide the opportunity to make contributions to human knowledge and human welfare that most people simply cannot make. So if you're an INTP or an INFJ watching this, don't forget this: your mind doesn't follow the world, it rebuilds it. You don't think outside the box, you question why the box exists. That's not a flaw. That's the rarest cognitive strength on the planet. But here's the part most people never explore: how does your superpower actually show up in your life? Is it in the way you predict outcomes before anyone else? The way you understand people without them saying a word? The way you solve problems others can't even define? I want to hear from you, truly. Which ability resonated with you the most? What's one moment where your weird thinking saved the day? And if you're comfortable, drop your type, INTP or INFJ, in the comments so we can see how many of the 2% found each other here. And if this video made you feel seen, then don't stop here. There's an entire world of rare insights waiting for you, so check out the next video in this series and keep discovering the abilities most people will never experience. Your mind is rare. Your perspective is needed. And your voice might be exactly what another INTP or INFJ needs to hear today.